I'll do that.
We're going to listen to Tony
now.
All
Okay,
right.
Tony, it's all up to you. Your pictures are on the bottom.
Oh, hey guys, good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, Tony.
How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good. Okay. I'm going to talk for a few minutes about field artillery. They're pretty much when you look at an army in general, it's divided up into 3 different categories. Oh, bless you. You have cavalry, which are, back then they were horseback. They carry sabers and they were used in a role like scouting to kind of look and see where the enemy might be. Then you have infantry, and that's the ground pounders, the grunts, the regular soldiers and their equipment. And then you have back then artillery. And these guys would use different size and types of cannons and mortars to fire at long range. And nowadays we have tanks and mobile artillery, and it goes on and on. But if you ever have the chance to go to Gettysburg, you'll notice that all over the area there's like hundreds of cannons, and they usually mark like where different lines were between the Union and Confederate forces. In Gettysburg itself, there's around like I think 350 cannons that are there. They were all put in place after the Civil War as like memorial markers. There's actually only one cannon that ever saw action at Gettysburg, and it's in a location where Buford had his very first assault. It was the first shot that was fired in the Battle of Gettysburg. But during the engagement of the Battle of Gettysburg, there was almost 700 cannons between the Unions and the Confederates. So if you ever go to Gettysburg and you see these cannons that were pretty much double what you see, and it kind of gives you the massive scope and scale of how large and how important of an engagement this was. So when you look at this picture, here is this right behind what's known as the copse of trees. Yesterday when I talked about Pickett's charge and the men going over the stone wall, that stone wall was directly behind me. So what you see here is a typical setup for a battery. In the Civil War, batteries were typically 4 to 6 guns. So there would be 6 guns lined up in a row. You see the one right here. And then to the rear, you would have the ammunition chest, the caisson. And then if you look a little bit farther back by the road, you see another set, looks like a limber. That's the limber, and that would carry all their supplies and spare parts, etc. So the ammunition be kept in the middle and then a gun up front. Each battery, like I said, have about 6 guns, typically around 100 guys each per battery. And then each gun would have 7 guys to operate it. And then, as you can tell, okay, 6 guns times 7 guys, that still leaves room for 40, 50 people. So there's all this additional help towards the rear. And if you go past the road behind the last limber, that's where they would keep all the horses. And you would hook all this up, and each gun needed at least 6 horses to move. So you see there's a lot of supplies, a lot of equipment, a lot of logistics that go into moving these cannons around. The guns you see right there are 12-pound Napoleon guns, what they were called. They were very safe and reliable, so they were kind of popular on both sides of the armies, north and south. They're named after the French Emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte. And they're able to fire different types of ammunition. The guns themselves have a range of around 1,500 yards, which is almost a mile. So for back then, that's pretty significant. They would use something that was called solid shot, which was just pretty much like a bullet looks now, just a solid piece of lead. And they would use that to kind of fire into the woods or way off in a distance to kind of break up trees and kind of hit buildings and knock stuff down on the enemy. And then as the infantry started moving forward, they would switch to something called either grape shot or shell. Grape shot is pretty much looks like if you ever seen like a little clump of grapes. That would fire outside the cannon, and then they would explode over top of the troops. The shell would do the same. It would be on a timed fuse. So inside that shell is gunpowder and with a fuse. So when it got to 400 yards, 600 yards, wherever they wanted to set that fuse for, it would explode over top of the infantry. And then if the infantry happened to get very, very close, they would switch over to something called canister, which is pretty much just a giant shotgun shell. It was filled like with the giant canister, literally like if you see like a coffee canister, filled it up with a bunch of like lead balls, and they would shoot that at close range. So the guns themselves are very, very effective. And And then something else that we saw there, and I'll bring this picture up. This monument here is to the Pennsylvania Light Independent Artillery F, and they were known as Hampton's Battery, and they were mustered in Pittsburgh. They were named after their original captain, Robert Hampton. They were mustered, which means they kind of formed together and got organized. It was actually on the north side. And back then, Pittsburgh was part of actually two cities. There was Pittsburgh and then there was Allegheny City. So they were on the north side. And so they were mustered in 1861. And they fought at the Battle of Gettysburg. And they actually were pretty well-seasoned soldiers. They fought at the Battle of Bull Run, which was the first major engagement in the Civil War, Antietam, Fredericksburg, Chancellorsville. They were part of, prior to the Battle of Gettysburg, Stonewall Jackson, one of the more famous Confederate commanders, had a famous Shenandoah Valley campaign in Virginia, where he tied up a lot of the Union Army to kind of relieve some stress off of Robert E. Lee, who we talked about yesterday. Excuse me. And they were engaged with him down in Virginia for a while before making it to Gettysburg. But they fought in this area of the Peach Orchard in Gettysburg. So they have a monument there dedicated to them, and it talks about them being from Pittsburgh. And there's also a monument that is on the north side of Pittsburgh. And I haven't found it yet, but I have an idea of where it's at. So maybe sometime this week I'll take a drive-by and snap a picture of it. But they were kind of part of something that interesting that happened at Gettysburg. On the second day of fighting, they were under the command of a Union general named Sickles. And Sickles, his boss was the overall Union commander, General Meade, the counterpart to Robert E. Lee for the Confederates. Sickles decided to disobey orders, and we could talk a little bit about leadership and decision-making here that this all ties in. Sickles disobeyed orders from Meade and decided to move his army forward. And he moved his army forward before anybody knew what else in the Union was going on. He kind of stretched his guys out very thin. And that made them kind of ripe for the picking for the Confederates. So the Confederates took advantage of it. And they almost were able to kind of break through the lines. Oh, bless you. So whenever General Meade found out what Sickles had done, well, what could he do? He couldn't tell them to pull them back. He couldn't, so he pretty much had to rush his reserve soldiers into position to help kind of fortify what Sickles had done. So, sometimes we don't always get to make the decisions that we want to, or sometimes the people we're working with do something that we don't expect. But, whether it's a good decision, bad decision, it's better than no decision at all. So Sickles kind of stepped outside the bounds, but that's kind of the general he kind of was. But Meade kind of, he didn't leave him out there. He knew that, this is the best. It's not the best opportunity that I could do, but it's the only, chance that I have by kind of pulling up some reserve troops at the last minute. And during this action, there's some heavy fighting, and one of the artillery guys from Hampton's Battery from Pittsburgh was awarded the Medal of Honor for what happened. He managed to save one of the guns from being captured by the Confederates. And the Medal of Honor is the highest award to be given out in the military. It's very distinguished and prestigious and very difficult to come by. So he did some sort of heroic actions there at Gettysburg. His name was Casper Carlisle, and he received the Medal of Honor for saving one of those guns there at the Peach Orchard. So let me see our pictures we have here. So that's a closer up picture of the cannon. You can see where you loaded in the front, and then there would be buckets that hung off there with water, and they would use a sponge and wipe out the barrel to make sure there was no hot embers. They would load it up, and then they would put like a little. They load in the charge of gunpowder, and then put the canister or the shell in and ram it in behind it. Then use a little fuse, and they would aim it. And then each time they fired this cannon would move back 5-6 feet. So every time they fired it, they had to realign it and kind of get it back into place.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, how big were the cannonballs?
They came in all different sizes. You had smaller ones, which were 6 pounds. You had up to 10 pounds, 12 pounds, and then you get up into 20 pound. It just depends on the design and the style of cannon. So they really came in a lot of different sizes. Typically between 3 inches to 6 inches was probably about the size of the shell. So if you can imagine on the higher end, I mean, think about what 5 pounds feels like. You can see what double that or triple that or quadruple that depending on the size of the cannon.
So are they round or are they oval?
Well, they're round because they go inside that barrel. It's almost like how a rifle or a pistol would work. But the
Gun.
ordnance itself varied. So if you had the shell, the solid shot or the shell, that would look pretty much just like a regular bullet. And then I mentioned there's that grape shot where if you can picture, grapes on a vine, if you kind of put that into a cylinder, that's what it looked like. And then there was canister, which, like I mentioned, if you took like a coffee can and filled it up with lead balls, that's what that would look like. But they were all round. They were all designed to fit inside the gun that they were designed for.
Okay.
What's a magazine, Tony?
A magazine is where ammunition is kept. So by definition, yeah, in artillery they would have a magazine. That's where like they would keep ammunition. When you speak about like handguns and rifles, a magazine is inserted from the bottom of the weapon. So that's what goes in. And then some other
The bullets go in there.
the bullets go inside the magazine, and those are loaded from below. And then sometimes commonly referred to as a clip. The clip is actually inserted from above or the side. So some guns are designed to kind of load their ammunition separate.
Mr. Tony,
Yes.
I have a toy gun that makes noise. And it's
Okay, that's cool.
a pistol, I think. I don't know. With a little telescope. Pretty cool.
So and there's a picture of the limber and the case on. The gun would be attached to forward to that, and then the horses would pull those. So that's the forward or the box on the left is where they would keep all their different ammunition and gunpowder. And then the box in the rear, you could see like there's a spare wagon wheel. They would keep all their spare supplies and accoutrements in there.
So will they carry their cannons there?
Yes, yeah. The cans would be hooked up to that, and then the horses would pull all that all together.
So how many horses need the power to
You need at least 6 horses.
Wow.
So and there was times and there's numerous occasions in the Civil War where horses would be injured or something, they wouldn't be available. So the guys or if the terrain was like too rocky or too steep, the guys would actually have to pull those themselves. So you can imagine 6 guns, all that equipment, 100 guys, 60 horses. That's still a lot to move, and you're not going to move anywhere fast.
So where's that wheel back there?
That's a spare wheel in case you need to replace it. Just like a spare tire on your car.
Oh.
There's another picture.
Were they heavy?
Yeah, I mean they were pretty heavy. They're made of solid wood and steel. I don't know their exact weight, but I've had the chance to see a team of horses and artillery being pulled with all that, and when it thundered past me. So I mean, it was you can imagine the weight involved of 6 horses, their equipment. I mean, you're easily dealing with several thousand pounds that's moving.
Oh, so just like Lancaster. The horses.
Lancaster?
I guess the horse.
Yeah, the horses.
Oh yeah. So does anybody else have any other questions?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay. Cool. All right. Well, I'll turn things back over to Miss Hildebrand, and I hope that all of you have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you later.
Bye. You too.
Bye,
See you guys.
Tony.
Thanks for your time.
Bye.
Thank you so much, dude. Thank you. Bye.
Get over here. Get over here.
All right, let me get us reorganized here.
He was talking about handguns with us, like.
I can't see you.